Greetings, YouTube. I recently saw a video here done by one of our fellow vloggers, and I don't remember who did it. I apologize. Dealing with the nature of testing, education, and reading. And I believe it was a woman, and she had talked about the whole concept of how testing is not a great reflection of a proper education. And I have to agree with that. One of the issues with testing, and I understand that you have to have some kind of benchmark to see where a student is along an educational path. I get that. But the problem with the way we do testing, at least in the West, and I'm speaking in America, I should say. I'm not sure if testing in Europe is exactly the same or not, but is that we become lost in the tests themselves. Instead of the tests becoming a reflection of the educational process, the tests become the educational process itself. And it's kind of like paying attention to the road on your journey and not paying attention to anything else other than the road. There's a whole world around you, but if you look at just the road, you're really missing out on the process getting you from point A to point B. And that's what I feel the focus is skewed in America. We're facing down here, gotta do this, gotta pay attention, and we're missing everything else that's involved in the process of the journey that is education. I'm going to give you an example. We've all heard of the IQ test, intelligent quotient test. The intelligent quotient test, the IQ test, was originally created in France, and I forget who did it, as a means of deciding whether students needed additional help. So someone needed to quantify, does that student need, special education classes, and does that student not need special education classes? So they developed this test to figure out, here's the lowest score that we think doesn't need special education tests, and below this score we think they do need special education tests. And in that regard, it's probably been effective. However, once that metric was created, people began to look at it and say, hey, we can now compare people who are above that level to see where they stack in comparison to each other. But that's not what the test was originally designed to do. The test was originally just to decide, do students below this level need special help? And in that very simple, on-off switch kind of process, yes, no, it works admirably. But when you get above that point, really what the data you're generating is who is the best at taking tests. Because the IQ tests are very culturally centric. You can write a test that is aimed at WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, that is going to mean that people that aren't WASPs are going to have a hard time answering the questions, even if you had some theoretical universal test. Those two people are exactly the same IQ level, or some way of measuring that. Also, it doesn't take into consideration other forms of intelligence than test taking. The last time I took a test like that, I think I scored in the top 3%, and I think the last time I took an IQ test back in high school or something like that, I think I was running in like the 110 range, something like that. So slightly above the quote-unquote average, but not far. But reality, all that was showing is I'm good at taking that test. And another example of that is that during high school we took a black test. Someone had designed a black urban version of the IQ test to show how you could aim a test culturally at one group and have it be difficult for those outside that cultural group to answer those questions. And the whole class took it, and I scored a 75 or 76, something like that in it. I think it was like that, because I remember I tied it in my head to the bicentennial year, which was 16 or 20 points higher than my friend Al, who's black. Why? Because Al was raised in New Hampshire, essentially, by a mother that did everything in her power to distance him from what is considered the traditional urban black experience. Whereas I had been exposed through reading many different things, to some of the answers in that question that he had not been exposed to. So the whitest white boy on the planet scored higher than my buddy, who's an actual black person. And there's an example of how a test is not getting you the information that you want, not giving you the information that you need. In America, we've become obsessed with it. We say, well, if not enough students pass this test, that means that school's failing, you're not going to get as much funding. And that is absolutely insane. Why do you want to take money away from a school because it's not getting a score? Or why you're going to make punitive strikes against teachers because saying, well, you're not doing a good enough job. There are teachers out there doing everything that's humanly possible to educate their students, going above and beyond. And yet, because of the school system and the testing system and the structure that they're stuck in, their efforts are being wasted. Whereas there are teachers in there that are punching a time card. But since they're jumping through the hoops the way that the school systems want them to jump, they appear as though they are doing better, when all they're doing is punching a friggin' time card. When their involvement with the students is close to nothing. Where they don't connect, where they're not concerned with the education, they're just concerned with that looking at the road testing process. Education is dynamic. Education is a give and take. Education is a two-way street, if I'm going to use the street metaphor a little bit more here. That the teachers and the students have to work together to gain access to the full spectrum and the full range of what an education can be. It is not static. It is not something I can take a set of calipers out of my drawer and go, okay, there it is. Who was the Greek king that had the iron bed? I can't remember his name. That if you didn't fit the iron bed, if you were too long, they'd cut your legs off so you fit it, and if you weren't long enough, they stretched you out till you did. That's the testing system in America. If you don't fit, they make you fit. It doesn't matter that you were never meant to fit. It doesn't matter that you will never be productive within that fit. Nobody cares about that. All they care is that this is the metric we have to keep you in. And by gosh and by golly, we're going to make you fit in that metric. And if it kills you in the process, well, that's just the way it is. I'm sorry, ma'am. The operation was a success, but your husband died. I mean, that kind of thinking, that kind of rigid thinking, the whole zero tolerance policy foundation that grew out of that kind of thinking is just as insane. You have to have someone involved making intelligent, on-the-ground decisions that are not being arbitrarily created by someone else. Now, there are guidelines that can be set up broadly and that can be tuned. That you can say from a distance, okay, these are the things we think they need to hit. Now, just make sure that on the ground, you were trying to get in there as close as you can. And if you can't, tell us why. And they discover that, okay, the metric we originally had is way too narrow. This is where it needs to be. And we discovered that by making that metric here, we get a whole lot more of the students. You get a much broader range of educational success. And the ones that fall outside of it, because the ones that feel limited, because they are more advanced, well, maybe we can find a program that'll help with them. And those that fall outside of it because they can't keep up, they can also get a system that helps them. But you can't have just this static metric in a dynamic world. I mean, I work in a factory. And one of the things you constantly hear in the world is that he works like a machine, you know, like the idea that someone that's very regular and punctual. And guess what, folks? Machines are not that. I work with machines every day. Machines are as organic as the people that run them. They have moods. They vary from day to day. A machine that does the same thing every single bloody day for years will not behave the same way every day. And the person has to dynamically change to make sure that they are working as best they can with the machine. Engineers and bosses will not believe you. Engineer bosses will tell you, oh no, we set it up so it works. No, that's great. I'm glad you set it up so it works the same way every day. It doesn't. I'm the guy running the machine, and I'm telling you, the parts don't work the same today as they did yesterday. I may not be able to explain to you why, You're the engineer, but they don't. By that same concept, the teacher is the person there doing it with that incredibly dynamic group of students. And class sizes need to be way smaller in America. 20 and under. Alright? Anything over 20 is, in my opinion, just crazy. So I've talked a bit about testing, a bit about education. I talk about reading. Reading is something that we need to emphasize from the earliest moments of a child's life. Long before they are ever tackling reading a book themselves, they need to be read to. They need to see their parents reading. I can't emphasize how important that is. My father was an abusive drunk. Absolutely insane. And he put his family through hell. It has taken me decades to get to the point where I'm overcoming the damage done to me in the first 14 years of my life. Decades. I'm still working on it at 49, and I'm getting there. But one of the things he did to me was instill a sense of joy of reading, because he was a reader. He was obsessive in some ways. He used to actually keep 3x5 business cards with synopsises of the books he read. Why he did this, I don't know, but he did. But then again, I do YouTube videos about the books I read, so maybe I haven't fallen far from the tree. But he instilled in me a love of reading. And I started reading when I was 5. And I've read something every single day since then. For 44 years, I've read something every single day of my life. A magazine, a news article, something here online. Non-fiction books, role-playing games, something, even comic books. I've read something every single frigging day of my life. And I don't imagine I am ever going to stop. And that love of reading is something we have to foster in kids. I work with people in my career in the last 30 years. I've been in manufacturing for 30 years. And I work with people who are raising children in homes with no books. 0 books. Not a single book. Not reference books. Nothing. People raising children who never read, whose children never see them read. That's crazy. And we wonder why students don't love to read. We wonder why kids are having a difficult time in finding a way that makes reading comfortable and accessible to them. Because there is nothing around them to show you that it's comfortable and accessible. There's nothing around them that shows them that this is a behavior that society endorses. Until the last decade or so, we have lamented the whole, well, he's just a bookish kid, isn't he? Why isn't he out there being social? Because we've emphasized the social things more than the introverted acquisition of knowledge. We should be broadcasting the world that it's awesome that kid can play basketball. That's awesome that kid knows how to tune a car. It's awesome that kid knows how to read a book. I mean, as I said, my father was an abusive drunk and told me I was stupid for the first 14 years of my life. And if somebody tells you that for 14 years, you believe them. It wasn't until I was 20, 6 years after he left, that I woke up one day and realized, you know something? You're not stupid! I was reading a book on chaos theory, and it occurred to me that a stupid person wouldn't understand this book. Now, I had read books between 14 and 20 that were as complex as chaos theory. Philosophy. Fiction. Things like science. Sociology. History, of course. That were as complex, but I had ignored the fact that it took a smart person to read those and comprehend them and understand them, because that message, you are stupid, had been beaten into my head, in some cases literally, for so long. And that's what we are as a society are doing to our children. We're beating it into their skull that reading is somehow bad. That it's not common, it's not everyday, it's not part of the warp and weft of the fabric of our lives. And because of that, we lose out. Those kids lose out. Those adults lose out. We need to show them that reading is just as important as everything else in their life. I am not deriding social skills. I am not deriding sports or mechanical aptitudes. I build weapons for a hobby. There's one over there in the corner. Okay, I do handyman work around the house. I've got a toolbox right here within arm's reach of me. I appreciate the practical, but reading is a practical skill. My reference library would let us, as a people, rebuild our society if we had to. Why? Because I like books. And I like reference books. And I like having them at hand when the electricity isn't on. Because we didn't always have the internet. And I'm kind of a stick in the mud that way, I guess. Because I'm old school. But we need to make sure that our children know that reading is important. That testing in school is great. That your school education is awesome. But that reading on your own and furthering your own education is just as important. Your education stops when you die. And as a theist that believes in an afterlife, I'm not even convinced it ends then. So it doesn't end the day you graduate high school. It doesn't end the day you graduate from college. It doesn't end the day you graduate from some tech school or for some business school you took after you got later in your career. It doesn't ever end. You need to constantly be pouring knowledge into your mind, finding connections that you didn't see before. Because if you can do that, you fully become a person. And it doesn't matter you work in a factory. It doesn't matter if you are a nurse. It doesn't matter if you are an MBA. It doesn't matter if you collect garbage for a living. It doesn't matter what you do. This is more important. You are not your career. That is your job. Your career is becoming a better person. That is your career. Becoming the best version of you there is possible in the world. And we need to do that through education and reading and through sensible applications of the metric system like testing. We can't just say that is the solution and that is the solution and that is the solution and walk away with a dynamic process like education. I've really rambled here and I apologize. Apparently, I had more to say than I thought I did. Funny, when I turn the camera on, I'm like, I don't really know what I'm going to talk about today on this topic. Because all my notes say is testing, education, and reading. That's all it is. That's it. It's a one line. That's the only note I gave myself for this video. And I just kind of went with it, apparently. So, I apologize for ranting. I'm up on 18 minutes, so I'm going to be quiet now. I'm going to open up the conversation to other people. I want you to tell me how you think we can fix the system, how you think we can best serve our kids. What has your experience been with testing and education and with reading? What do you think we can do and we should do? And do you think that education never ends? I want to know. I want to get the conversation started. Because that is also part of education.